The word holiday, long before it was attached to seaside jaunts to Sidmouth or Bideford or to cheap flights to exotic destinations, literally meant a holy day. In the Middle Ages, this included obligatory attendance at church. Today, going to church, assuming our churches are open, is an option, not an obligation, a leisure activity on par with digging the allotment or playing golf. Prizing our liberty, we look back on the medieval system with disdain. We see it as backward and oppressive. But one of its advantages was that at least people stopped and rested and said their prayers on a regular basis. And if truth be told, a holy day was also a bit of an excuse for a party. These days we've lost that rhythm, and with it we've lost the spiritual link between holidays and holiness. Instead, we've imprisoned holiness in shrines and statues and stained glass windows. It's a link that we need to rekindle because it's fundamental to human flourishing. In the Bible, the Hebrew word for holy is Kadosh, and interestingly, the word first applied is not to a place such as Mount Sinai, or to a building such as the Temple in Jerusalem, or even a person such as Abraham or Moses. But instead, Kadosh applies to time. In the opening of Genesis in chapter 2, this is what we hear. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done, and God rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. In other words, holiness is first and foremost about our use of time. And interestingly, it's not about work, it's about rest. Now, this ancient wisdom is what lies behind the Jewish observance of Sabbath. We grow in holiness as we learn to let go and rest. Now, why is that? Because, as we let go and become more ourselves, so it is that God can come closer to us. And this is absolutely the good news that we each need to hear at this time, because let's face it, the last 4 or 5 months have been a torrid time. This pandemic has been seriously scary, as people we've known and loved have become ill, some seriously so, and some have died. We've been shut in on ourselves. Initially it seemed fine, but as the days became weeks and the weeks became months, so novelty was replaced for many people by a cocktail of stress, anxiety and fear. Our collective exhaustion comes not just from the extra demands that this has all made upon us, such as working from home, or for some also having to homeschool the children, or missing out on that longed for holiday, or for trying to live stream worship and negotiate endless Zoom meetings, but simply from the emotionally draining impact on what we've been going through together. Small wonder that some people just say that they are exhausted. God doesn't delight in burnt out people. God wants us to thrive and to relish his gift of life. This summer, let's welcome the opportunity to rest. I love the poetry of George Herbert. George Herbert gave up a promising academic career and a place at court to become a country parson. And he became vicar of Bemerton outside Salisbury, where he was until 1633 and his death at the young age of 39. Many of his poems have become much loved hymns and songs, but one that hasn't is the Pulley, and I'd like to read it to you now. Now, when I studied this poem at school, I was always fascinated by the title, The Pulley. I never really understood, and to be honest, I still don't quite understand why he called it that. So if you know, perhaps you can let me know. I think it's because a pulley helps us to lift heavy loads. And therefore what this poem is about really is about exhausted people and how God comes to meet us in our need. When God at first made man, having a glass of blessings standing by, let us, said he, pour on him all we can. Let the world's riches which dispersed lie contract into a span. So strength first made a way, then beauty flowed, then wisdom, honour, pleasure. When almost all was out, God made us stay, perceiving that alone of all his treasure, rest in the bottom lay. For if I should, said he, bestow this jewel also on my creature, he would adore my gifts instead of me, and rest in nature, not the God of nature. So both should losers be. Yet let him keep the rest, but keep them with repining restlessness. Let him be rich and weary, that at least, if goodness lead him not, yet weariness may toss him to my breast. Is that last line that has always spoken to me. Let weariness toss him to my breast. Holidays, whether we're going abroad or staying at home, are about letting go. And who knows, perhaps letting God come close to us. Letting God come to that inner fortress where so often there is a label hanging outside saying, keep out. And when I read George Herbert's poem, I instinctively think of those other words of St. Augustine, which are both a consolation and a challenge. Our hearts are restless till they find their rest in you, O God. We're not machines, not functionaries. The point of leisure is not that we should function faultlessly and not break down, but that we should continue to be human beings. That's the point. The Psalms, more poetry, are also very important to me. I love them, and although for donkey's years now I've been saying them in modern translations, instinctively it's the good old prayer book that I turn to, and it's the poetry of the prayer book that's written in my heart. People assume that the translation here is the same as that we find in the King James Bible, the authorized version, but they're not. The Psalms in the prayer book were translated 60, 70 years before the authorized version, and they were done by one of my predecessors, Miles Coverdale, who was Bishop of Exeter in the reign of King Edward VI. Now in Tudor times, the bishops had a summer palace in Paynton. Well, the palace has long since disappeared, and there's a modern vicarage built in the grounds of the old palace, but the old perimeter walls by and large are still there, and in one corner, looking out right out to Tor Bay, is a tower which is called Coverdale's Tower. These days it's owned by a private trust, but you can go in it, and it's said that it is there that Miles Coverdale translated the Psalter. I don't know whether or not that was true, but I've got this fanciful picture of Coverdale being here in Exeter and getting on his horse and packing his knapsack full of manuscripts and then galloping off to Paynton in August for the summer holidays. I picture him sitting at his desk in this tower, looking out to sea, with the Hebrew there in front of him, and then the Greek translation and the Latin over here, and comparing and contrasting the translations and writing the Psalms for us in English. And one of the Psalms I love best is Psalm 46. God is our hope and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be moved, and though the hills be carried into the midst of the sea. Though the waters thereof rage and swell, and though the mountains shake at the tempest of the seas. The rivers of the flood thereof shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her, therefore shall she not be removed. God shall help her, and at that right early. The heathen make much ado, and the kingdoms are moved, but God hath showed his voice, and the earth shall melt away. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our refuge. O come hither, and behold the works of the Lord, what destruction he hath wrought upon the earth. He makes wars to cease in all the world. He breaketh the bow, and knappeth the spear in sunder, and burneth the chariots in the fire. Be still then, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen, and I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. God is our hope and strength, a very present help in trouble. How often we've said those words in these last few months. But also the verse 10, be still and know that I am God. That's such a wonderful text for prayer, and indeed those few words have found its way into all sorts of songs and hymns. Be still and know that I am God. What has always fascinated me is 1,000 years before Coverdale translated the Hebrew into English, St. Jerome was translating them into Latin, and he translated the Hebrew differently. He translated it, vacati mihi, empty yourself out and know that I am God. And that gives a completely different understanding of prayer. Empty yourself out of all your angst and your stress, all the stuff that's cluttered up inside your soul. We talk about God filling us up with his Holy Spirit filling us, but how can God get a look in if our souls are completely full of junk? Empty yourself out and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Allow God to come close to you. And it's what I encourage you to do now as you listen, not to music, but actually to the sound of the waves on the shore. Perhaps the sound that Miles Coverdale heard as he sat in that tower looking out over Tor Bay. And as you look and you listen, just empty yourself out and allow God to come close to you. Another poet that has inspired me is R.S. Thomas. Like George Herbert, he was an Anglican priest, but in the church in Wales. And for many years he was vicar of a group of parishes on Anglesey in North Wales. I'm told that he could be rather dour, which I've actually always found rather endearing, because I have to say, when I think about myself, I think as the years go on, I'm becoming a bit of Mr. Grumpy. On days off, I love walking on the beach. I love going to the north coast and walking on Woolacombe Beach and feeling the wet sand between my toes. I love going on the south coast and walking there on Branscombe Beach. I love sitting and listening to the sound of the waves crash upon the beach, and that sense as the tide goes out, the retreat and the roar as it goes out and pulling the pebbles out. I find it immensely restful and evocative. Now, I haven't a clue what the beaches are like in Anglesey or in the parish where R.S. Thomas was vicar, but he takes that image of the beach and of the waves crashing on it actually as an image of prayer, and more particularly of God who listens to our prayer. And the poem is called The Other. There are nights that are so still that I can hear the small owl calling far off, and a fox barking miles away. It is then that I lie in the lean hours awake, listening to the swell born somewhere in the Atlantic, rising and falling, wave on the long shore by the village that is without light and companionless. And the thought comes of that other being who is awake too, letting our prayers break on him, not like this for a few hours, but for days, years, for eternity. This summer, if you possibly can, take some time off, stop, rest, relax. And to repeat what I said earlier, it's important to rest not so that we become more effective or more efficient in our jobs. It's important because we're human beings. It's important because the good news we're called upon to preach is that all human beings are summoned by God to rest with him for eternity, to share in his Sabbath. We're citizens of the kingdom of heaven, and we're called to lounge around with God for all of eternity. So why don't we practice now? After the trauma of the last few months, we need to recover a lightness of touch and a sense of playfulness, right here and now. From the Christian perspective, our vocation and dignity as human beings is that we're called to play with God for eternity. Who will ever believe us if we are not seen to rest here and now? So rest up. Have a good August. Have a good summer.